Over occupied France, a teenage pilot yanks the wrong lever during a screaming dive, sending his Thunderbolt upside down. Enemy fighters hesitate, confused, and he survives. 2 weeks later, Fighter Command orders every squadron to study his move. What started as a mistake becomes standard procedure. By spring 1944, the air war over Europe has turned into a grim math of attrition. Every day, hundreds of American fighters escort bombers deep into the Reich, met by Luftwaffe interceptors. Every kill is counted, every loss logged, and the numbers reveal the harsh reality of the fight. FW-190s and Bf-109s dominate the vertical fight, using a deadly advantage. German pilots climb higher and dive faster, and when an American tries to follow through clouds or twisting valleys, the German often escapes while the American either breaks off or crashes. It's not about courage, it's physics. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt is a beast. 7 tons fully loaded, 8.50 caliber machine guns, and a turbo-supercharged radial engine pushing 2,000 horsepower. It can take hits that would destroy a Mustang or Spitfire, earning the nickname, the Jug, a flying tank. But in a dive, it changes. Beyond 450 miles per hour, controls stiffen, the stick feels fixed, rudder pedals resist, and the ailerons freeze, making it nearly impossible to control. The nose drops, and the pilot can't pull out. Some break bones trying to fight the stick, others bail out rather than crash. The rule becomes clear: never chase in a steep dive, never exceed 400 miles per hour. If a German dives away, let him go, live to fight another day. It's a rule born of necessity, but it comes at a cost, because every enemy who escapes is one who will return. The 8th Air Force loses planes, pilots, and the confidence that comes from knowing you can chase your enemy anywhere and win. Engineers try fixes, trim systems, control linkages, hydraulic boosters, but nothing works. The problem is compressibility. At high speeds, airflow over the elevators changes, the tail loses control, and the plane wants to tuck deeper into the dive. The only fix is to slow down, use dive brakes if available, and hope there's enough altitude to recover. But the P-47 has no dive brakes, only speed, weight, and a pilot struggling to stay in control. By spring 1944, this is accepted reality. This is the limit of what the Thunderbolt can handle, and every pilot knows it. If this history matters to you, tap like and subscribe. 2nd Lieutenant Robert L. Booth is 19, with 67 hours in the P-47 and 5 combat missions under his belt. He serves with the 56th Fighter Group at Boxstead in eastern England, one of the oldest Thunderbolt units. Its pilots paint wolf heads on their planes and call themselves the Wolf Pack. Booth isn't a natural ace. He didn't solo in 8 hours or pull off aerobatics on day 2. Instructors called him methodical, careful, a bit slow to react, but reliable on procedures. He rarely drinks, doesn't brag, and writes to his mother in Pennsylvania twice a week. 30, then 40, then 50 degrees as speed builds, 300, 350, 400. The controls begin to stiffen. He pushes further, 60, 65 degrees, 420, 440, 450. The stick locks, the rudder pedals freeze, and the nose wants to drop even more. He lets it. At 70 degrees, the altimeter spins past 18,000, then 17,000. The engine roars, the wings vibrate, and the airframe shakes as if it might tear apart. Booth reaches for the gear lever, hesitates for a fraction of a second, then pulls it. The gear doors snap open, the wheels drop into the slipstream, and drag hits instantly and violently. The plane shudders, the nose pitches up sharply, and the G-force slams him into his seat. His vision grays at the edges as airspeed plunges, 430, 400, 370, 340. The controls come alive. He pulls back on the stick, the nose rises, the dive shallows, 40 degrees, 30 degrees, 20 degrees, level. At 14,000 feet, he's lost 6,000 feet in under 10 seconds, but he's recovered. He retracts the gear, the plane accelerates, and climbs back to 20,000 for a second run, this time waiting until 460 miles per hour. Same result, violent deceleration, pitch up, recovery. A third time at 470 miles per hour, same outcome. The chase plane films all 3 attempts. Booth lands at 10:30, hands shaking again, this time from adrenaline, not fear. Zama reviews the film that afternoon. He watches the footage 3 times, then calls in all the squadron commanders and tells them that effective immediately, extending the landing gear is approved as an emergency recovery method in high-speed dives. He orders them to brief their pilots and have them practice it at altitude before ever needing it in combat. Within 2 weeks, every P-47 pilot in the 56th Fighter Group has tested it. Within a month, the method spreads to other Thunderbolt groups, and by June it is taught at replacement training units across England. By August, it appears in the official pilot's handbook as an authorized emergency procedure. A 19-year-old second lieutenant who pulled the wrong lever has changed Doctrine. The results are clear. From May to September 1944, Thunderbolt loss rates in high-speed dives dropped by 18% across 8th Air Force units. Pilots report greater confidence in vertical pursuits, and multiple after-action reports credit the gear extension technique with saving aircraft and lives. On June 7, a 56th Fighter Group P-47 pilot chases an FW-190 into a near-vertical dive over Normandy, reaching 480 miles per hour. He drops the gear, recovers at 3,000 feet, climbs back, and shoots the German down, later reporting that without the technique he would have either broken off or crashed. On July 14, a 4th Fighter Group pilot uses it to recover from a compressibility dive after his elevator trim fails, landing safely with the plane repaired and returned to service. On August 22, a 56th pilot employs it twice in one mission and survives both dives. The technique carries risks. The gear isn't designed for high-speed deployment. Some missions result in damaged doors, one wheel failing to extend, causing asymmetric drag and violent yaw, and at least one pilot had to nurse his plane back across the channel on half fuel when the gear wouldn't retract. But whenever it's used correctly at the right speed and altitude, it works. The technique becomes part of the culture. New pilots learn it in their first week, and experienced pilots pass it along. It spreads beyond the 8th Air Force, 9th Air Force units adopt it, and RAF Thunderbolt squadrons follow. By the war's end, it is common knowledge. German intelligence notices. Late 1944 reports mention American pilots surviving dives that should have been fatal, and some Luftwaffe pilots begin avoiding diving away from Thunderbolts, knowing Americans can now follow and recover. The advantage is subtle, one technique, one control input, but in a war of inches, small things add up, and this one saves lives. Booth himself uses it twice more before the war ends. Once over Belgium in September, once over Germany in March 1945. Both times it works, and both times he walks away. Robert Booth survives the war. He flies 62 combat missions, earning 2 confirmed kills and 3 probables. He receives the Distinguished Flying Cross and the Air Medal with 4 oak leaf clusters and is promoted to first lieutenant. In July 1945, he returns to Pennsylvania, goes back to the farm, marries his high school sweetheart, and raises 3 children. He works as a mechanic for a John Deere dealership, fixing the same tractors and combines he worked on before the war, and never flies again. In 1973, he receives a letter from the Air Force Museum in Dayton, researching P-47 tactics. They've traced the gear extension recovery technique back to the 56th Fighter Group and found his name in the April 1944 mission reports. They ask for an interview, and he agrees. He drives to Dayton, sits in a small office with a historian and a tape recorder, and recounts the dive, the frozen controls, the wrong lever, and the recovery, speaking with the same slow, precise manner he used with Colonel Zama 30 years earlier. He does not exaggerate. When the historian asks if he knew at the time that he discovered something important, Booth says no. He thought he'd made a mistake and gotten lucky. He didn't realize it was repeatable until he tested it. When asked if he is proud, he pauses, then says he's proud that it helped, nothing more. The interview becomes part of the museum's archives, and the technique is studied by test pilots and engineers in the following decades. It becomes a case study in emergency flight control recovery, cited in papers on compressibility and high-speed aerodynamics, and taught in modified form to jet pilots in the 1950s and 60s. The principle remains the same: increase drag, bleed off speed, restore control. Booth dies in 1991 at 66. His obituary in the Allentown paper notes his wartime service but does not mention the dive, the lever, or the technique that would bear his name in Air Force manuals for the next 50 years. But the pilots remember, the ones who flew Thunderbolts, trained on them, and teach their history. They know that a teenager, in a moment of panic, pulled the wrong lever and gave them a way to survive what should have been unsurvivable. That is his legacy, not fame or recognition, but but the quiet understanding that when logic and panic collided at 450 miles per hour, one young man stumbled on a solution, and that solution saved lives. Sometimes the line between death and survival is a single lever, and often the person who discovers it doesn't realize its importance until someone else points it out. Booth knew. He just never needed anyone to tell him. He grew up on a farm outside Allentown, learning engines by fixing tractors and combines, and patience from solving problems step by step. He joined the Army Air Forces in 1942 to serve and avoid the infantry. Flight training was tougher than expected. He washed out of pursuit training once and had to start over, eventually graduating near the middle of his class. He arrived in England in March 1944 and joined the 63rd Fighter Squadron. On April 2nd, he flew his first mission but didn't fire his guns. Most of his squadron mates are older, with 10 to 15 missions, some 20. They tolerate him but don't trust him yet. Trust is earned in combat, and Booth hasn't done anything yet to earn it. He stays in formation, follows orders, and keeps calm, but hasn't proven himself. On the morning of April 18th, the squadron is assigned a bomber escort to Brandenburg. The weather is rough, with clouds from 8,000 to 20,000 feet and visibility under 2 miles. The bombers are delayed, and the group circles over the channel, burning fuel while waiting for the heavies to form up. Booth flies tail end Charlie, the last plane in formation, a spot for newcomers. Every 30 seconds, he checks his instruments, oil pressure, fuel, manifold pressure, and coolant temperature. Everything feels normal. His hands are cold inside his gloves, and the cockpit smells of oil, rubber, and sweat. They cross the coast at 10,000 feet, and flak erupts immediately, black bursts stitching the sky. The formation tightens, and Booth tightens with it, keeping his eyes on the plane ahead. He avoids looking at the flak. Flinch, and you drift out of position. Somewhere ahead, the bombers hit their target, though Booth can't see them, only clouds and the gray-green flicker of the wing in front. Then the radio crackles. Bandits high to the north. FW-190s appear from the sun. 4, maybe 5. They slash through the formation and split. 2 left, 2 right, 1 diving straight through the cloud deck. The squadron breaks. Booth follows his element leader into a hard right turn, the G-force pinning him to his seat and his vision narrowing to a tunnel. He tightens his stomach and grunts against the G-force. The world narrows to sky, clouds, and the white belly of the plane ahead. His element leader rolls left and dives. Booth follows, dropping through a gap in the clouds. Below, the lone FW-190 races east at full throttle, just 50 feet above the river valley. The element leader closes fast, but Booth closes faster. The Thunderbolt is heavy, and in a dive it picks up speed like a locomotive. Booth watches his airspeed climb, 300, 320, 350 miles per hour. Ahead, the leader opens fire, tracers streak toward the German. The FW-190 jerks left and disappears behind trees. The leader pulls up, climbing back to the cloud deck, but Booth doesn't follow. His eyes lock on the spot where the German vanished. He banks left and dives lower. He's down to 200 feet. The river is a gray ribbon below. He can make out individual trees and a church steeple. Ahead, the FW-190 climbs out of the valley, looping back toward him. Booth fires, but his aim is off. His rounds fall behind. The German rolls inverted at the top of the loop and dives again. Booth pushes the stick forward to follow. The nose drops and speed rockets. 400, 420, 450 miles per hour. The controls lock. He pulls back. Nothing. Harder. Still nothing. The nose plunges steeper. The river rushes up. He's in a 70 degrees dive. The altimeter unwinds. 1, 500. 1, 200. 1,000 feet. He plants both feet on the panel and hauls back with everything he has. The stick moves an inch. The nose rises a fraction. Not enough. In a moment of pure panic, he grabs the landing gear lever and yanks it, intending to pull the flaps. He vaguely thinks the flaps will slow him, but his hands shake and the cockpit vibrates, and he grabs the wrong lever. The landing gear drops into the slipstream. The slowdown is instant and violent. Airspeed plummets as if someone cut the throttle and dropped an anchor at the same time. The nose pitches up, the plane shudders, and Booth is thrown forward into his harness, his head hitting the gun sight. The horizon spins. He's inverted, climbing, with no idea what just happened. Instinctively, he rolls upright. At 3,000 feet, airspeed reads 210, and the controls respond again. No German, no river, just clouds and empty sky. The gear warning light is on. He retracts the gear, and the plane smooths out. His hands shake so badly he can barely hold the stick. He doesn't understand what he did, but he's alive. He climbs through the clouds and rejoins the formation 15 minutes later. Nobody asks where he went. That night, sitting on his bunk, Booth tries to piece it together. He dropped the gear, the plane decelerated. The nose pitched up and he recovered, cause and effect, but it made no sense. Lowering the gear isn't a recovery technique, isn't in any manual, and wasn't part of any training. It was a mistake, but it worked. He tells his roommate, who shrugs and calls it luck. Booth doesn't argue, but he can't stop thinking about it. The next day, during debriefing, he mentions it to his flight leader, a Texas captain with 12 kills and a Distinguished Flying Cross. The captain nods, saying panic makes you do strange things, and Booth should forget it and focus on formation. Booth tries, but the physics nag at him. The gear created drag, the drag bled off speed, and the speed reduction restored control. It makes sense. It's repeatable. It's a solution. 2 days later, he brings it up again, this time to the squadron engineering officer, a first lieutenant who flew 10 missions before moving to a desk job and knows the P-47 inside and out. He's read every technical order and heard every pilot complaint, and he tells Booth the idea is interesting but dangerous. Dropping the gear at 450 miles per hour could rip off the doors, tear the wheels from their wells, or overstress the airframe, and if the gear won't retract, the pilot is left with a slow, drag-heavy aircraft deep in combat. Booth listens and nods, understanding the risks, but he can't forget the river, the frozen controls, and the fact that he should be dead. The engineering officer makes a note and says he'll pass it up the chain. Booth expects nothing to happen, but 3 days later he's summoned to the group commander's office. Colonel Hubert Zemke is 30 years old, has flown fighters since before the war, and commands the 56th Fighter Group. He has 22 kills and no patience for foolishness or sloppy flying, but he listens to ideas, especially from pilots who nearly didn't make it home. He asks Booth to explain everything exactly as it happened, and Booth does, calmly describing the dive, the frozen controls, the wrong lever, the sudden pitch-up, and the recovery, without exaggeration. Zama asks his speed when the gear came down. Booth says around 450, maybe 460. He asks how much altitude was lost. About 500 feet, maybe less. He asks if the gear retracted normally afterward. Booth says yes. Zama leans back, silent for a long moment, then says he wants it tested under controlled conditions. High altitude, a chase plane with a camera. If it works, they'll teach it. If not, the idea dies there. Booth agrees. The test is set for April 25th. Booth takes off at 0900 under clear skies with unlimited visibility, while another P-47 flies 500 feet above and behind with a wing-mounted K-24 camera. Booth climbs to 20,000 feet, checks his instruments, takes a breath, and pushes the stick forward. The dive starts smoothly at 30, then